Hello everyone, Pen Jedi here, and I'm just going to do a quick and dirty tutorial on how to do a smooth cloth modifier effect. I'm going to assume that you have a working knowledge of most of the stuff in 3D Studio Max that we're going to be doing. I'll kind of point it out as I go, and also that you're using at least version 2012 or higher. I'm using 2014, and it should be fairly similar to what you're using. So let's get right to it, make this quick. So we're going to make a torus, yay, torus. Alright, I'm going to change the segments to 60 and the sides to 30 just to make it a bit smoother, nothing ridiculous, no high render. And I always do this. Let me take it down to about a 40 and a 7 or 8. Yeah, in fact, let's do that. 40 and 8. I like it. So, there's a torus. That's going to be what we interact with. Here's the thing interacting with that thing we're interacting with. So, we set this here. That's a plane. I'm going to align it. There. It's aligned. Align. And I'm going to square it up a bit just because I'm like that. So, yeah. What are we in here? 150 range. I like it. Let's do 150, 150. So, I'm going to take the segments each piece, and I'm going to do 10 length and 10 width. At this point, what we've done is set up our cloth and our cloth collision object. So now, we're going to set them up as the cloth. So we click on this. First, we have to add a modifier of tessellate before we do the cloth, and we're going to operate on the polygons and set it to 4. This is my method. This is where I think some of the smoothness comes in, is rather than just cranking the faces on it, you actually tessellate. It's easier on a modifier to use a tessellated object rather than just a high poly. Also, it gives you a little bit of control over here, you know, if you want to do edge or face center. This comes more into play when you're using it on a solid object that's complex, and you want to give it some good, you know, professional-looking lines that can be either transposed between other software or just for the sake of, you know, being easier to render and view in the mesh. So, anyways, we're on the polygons level 4. We've got a pretty high count here. Looks good. Now we can go ahead and click on cloth, object properties within the cloth modifier, and we're going to go ahead and add objects and add the torus in now. Now since the torus is already selected here, we're just going to go ahead and set it up. So we're going to do a collision object, of course, and I'm going to set my offset at 3. Basically that's just the invisible buffer, you know, just this invisible barrier basically around any object that it becomes a collision object, and that barrier's thickness is dependent on this offset. So this prevents the object down here that the cloth interacts with punching through the cloth. As you may know, working with 3D Studio Max, you never want to have a mesh really, you know, directly on top of another mesh. You want to give it a little bit of a buffer, and so that's what that does. Now we switch over to plane, switch to cloth, and we're going to give it a preset. I like satin. Satin or silk works rather well. Silk is going to move a little faster, but for the sake of this, we're going to use satin. And I'm going to turn on use collision object friction. So for any chance the cloth, as it's processing, touches itself, it won't pass through. It doesn't always work the greatest. To be honest, I haven't actually tested it in 2014. I know in 2012 it had some issues with that. So you'd have to go in and kind of tweak and adjust how the cloth was interacting with the object. You can get as complex as you need to be. You just have to watch. If you overload the process of its calculations, it gets a little wonky. Yes, I said wonky. So now we have our plane set up. That's our cloth, our satiny cloth. We have our torus set up. It's our collision with a little buffer so we don't punch through our cloth, and that's all good to go. We're going to go over here, and we're not going to mess with anything on this list. Don't worry about it except for simulate. Before we do that, just for grins and giggles, I, as a habit, like to set my time to 500. When you work with more complex and more detailed animations, it's kind of nice just to have the extra keyframes there. Again, like I said, people asked how I did it. This is how I do it. You might do it different. Yeah, you. So, now we're going to click on Simulate. Bam. And what will happen is a little box will pop up here. A little box will pop up here. Let me double check something here. We've got cloth, project. Oh, no, something reset. Alright. We'll bug this together. Here we go. Alright, so I'm going to reset this. I don't know what happened. Maybe... I don't know. Oh, because I set the frames again. Ah, that's different. We're learning. Alright, so here's cloth. Back to satin. Set the use collision. Make sure our torus is good. Oops. Set it to 3. There we go. Now we can hit simulate. Now, normally when this box comes up for you for the first time, this close on finish will be checked. I like to leave it unchecked. In a nutshell, basically what happens is sometimes the cloth will get stretched in a complex deal. It'll look fine visually, but the calculations will get overloaded. And so it'll shut the renderer down. You've got to go through and reset your states, or reset the initial states, blah blah blah. It gets to be a pain in the butt. And so I like to just shut this off and let it crunch through as hard as it can. It will sometimes hit a point where it'll just stop and say, no, I'm sorry, I cannot do what you've asked me to do. We're done here. But for the most part, this is just a little safety on my part. Again, you might run into different scenarios depending on how you calculate and how you set up your scene. So what's about to happen here is this cloth's going to hit this invisible buffer, and you can kind of see it's going to happen here. You'll notice it's kind of cresting before it actually hits the object, which is fine, because in our case we don't see the interaction underneath. We just see the top-down view. Even if I was animating this, I would probably just pan across with the camera, and we wouldn't have to worry about seeing the buffer. So now what's happening is it's calculating this, and because we gave it this high tessellation, each of these squares is now responsible for all the depth and detail. And because we have so many squares, we have better depth and detail. You will find sometimes if you set your tessellation down too low, or if this is too low, this will start breaking up and looking like, crag rocks sticking out of a lake or something. It gets pretty horrendous. So, for the sake of this, you'll see in all our views, because we were dead centered our cloth over our torus, it will equally disperse the distribution and weight over that object. And again, if I wanted to have it slide off or do something a little more dynamic, I just have to shift it off center, and it would take care of that. So, this gives you the basic idea and how I've got them to look smooth. We're about, we'll let it get to 60 here, and boom, just go ahead and hit cancel, and it's all saved. And as long as you hit simulate, if you hit simulate local, it will show you, but it doesn't save it. So if you change the scene, if you do anything, there's no keyframes to it. It's just kind of like a little preview. So you leave it in simulate, you see that it's got 61. And then you notice we have a nice cloth interaction. If we play it out up to 60, boom, look at that. Yeah, nice and smooth. And when you take it into a render, depending on your lighting, your materials, that's going to be on, that'll be up to you what you set up. Look at that. You get a nice, smooth, satiny material. Again, you can change that material type to any of the presets available in there, whatever you like. So hopefully that helps, and if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, something you noticed, you'd like to go further in and know more about these, I can explain that in the tutorial. Just let me know, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.